At this. Good evening
Yes.
and afternoon, everybody. My name is Justin Blake, and I'm joined with my colleague Bob Weil in Chicago and Illinois. Evening, Dr. Bob. Well, good afternoon for you.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Justin, and it's exciting because my radio show called The Sports Doctors is replayed the following week for the past few years, UK Health Radio. So I
Right.
was excited that I was going to be going across the pond with somebody else.
And because you have had your radio show, you've been broadcasting for over 35 years now. So
I have been involved in the world of radio even longer than that, Justin. I was very, very fortunate to sit in on a couple of panels involving sports medicine because I had met a very famous sports therapist colleague, Bob Gaida, in
yes,
GAJD in the late 70s. And Bob, who was an ex Mr. Mercury, Mr. Universe, was one of the most knowledgeable people in sports performance, rehabilitation. He had one of the first Nautilus clubs, and athletes from everywhere would come to see him. And he had this tremendous regard for the role of the foot in sports. And this is how we got married. you know,
so love was first sight.
Absolutely. And I was very, very fortunate because then I had, through some of those connections, we did some spot guesting on shows. I then had an opportunity to initiate a show called The Sports Doctor. It's still called that today. In the late 80s into the 90s, where I spent 20 years at the famous blues jazz station, WKDC in Glen Ellen, Illinois, College of DuPage. And they did have some specialty shows, and the Sports Doctors was one of them. I think I came after the lawnmower show, if I recall.
In the graveyard shift, as it were.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we had a great time. It was. And I really, really enjoy. I still do live radio, like we're doing. And sometimes, like I was supposed to be with you like a week or two ago, and
Okay.
I couldn't get through on the link and whatever. And I felt a lot of empathy both ways because I've had numerous guests in the past. Maybe it was the wrong time zone, had the wrong day. So I'm glad we made it.
Yes. Yeah. And so like, going live always adds a certain friction to it,
Yes, it's an adventure.
especially when you can't get your camera on your phone to zoom in for people to watch on LinkedIn. But we'll try and do that now. I don't know why that's not
Yeah.
working. And so the you would have not ridden the wave, but I mean the interest in sports medicine and sports podiatry, of course, with running and everything in the States, you would have sort of seen that come right through.
Yes, I was very fortunate to be around. Some of them all became guests of mine, one regard or another. The of Steve Subotnick
Yeah.
and the other champions, Dr. Weil, my namesake, a few years older than me, who was the podiatrist of the Bears for years and years, and some of the different Dr. Schuster, the famous Langer family, the great Burns Podiatric Lab. I was very fortunate to get mixed in. As a matter of fact, Justin, I was honored to be inducted into the National Fitness Hall of Fame.
That's right.
April was 2 years ago, and posthumously in my class was the famous running cardiologist George Sheehan,
Mm-hmm.
and the famous author. He wrote so many motivational books, and he put podiatry on the map because he was a runner. He was a cardiologist. He was well respected by the medical profession. And when he started saying, hey, so many of these knee problems and overused knee problems are related to foot mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
And when he talked, people really, really listened. The
Yeah.
medical community started to tune in. We're not talking somebody fell, twisted their knee, tore a ligament. They see an orthopedic surgeon. We're talking about the athlete who says, I didn't have specifically an incident, but every time my daughter gets back into full daily tennis, or I'm running and now I'm running every day, or my son or daughter runs cross country and their knees continue, or shin splints. So I was fortunate because I was a fan of his book, Personal Best. Dr. Sheehan, as the running world. We're all familiar with the running shoe world. It's almost like cars. Every year they come out with new styles, so you really got to be on top of it. To this day, there are innovations all the time in the running shoe world, including, the world of barefoot running and light shoe running and all of these things. But I'll tell you this. Here's another pearl for you from the sports doctor for your friends. I don't care what your sport is or what your level or age is. Include strengthening your feet and ankles. Make a big deal. Rubber bands are a great way to strengthen your feet and ankles. It's still the most commonly injured area, and many times it's a weak link, and we want to pay big attention to that.
And as you say, something that somebody may not notice, a very simple ankle sprain or some type of imbalance can have a whole knock-on effect up through the system. Yeah, I think it was a Tom Novella joke. It was about the mid-70s that everybody, the podiatrists, realized, yes, there was a body above the ankle.
Yeah, well, this is what I used to say with my chiropractic friends. I've had a million of them as guests on the show. And again, I'm a sports doctor. We might have nutritionists. I might have authors who have written about running. We might have sports parents who might have other doctors, et cetera, et cetera. And many times we would see that if the lower extremity was having problems, persistent chronic problems, your back, your hips, your knees, your feet and ankles, then you should be including paying attention. The foot ankle is the first major shock absorber in the body. And the ability of the foot and ankle joints to go through this three-plane complicated motion called pronation and supination, many times those motions are either too much, they're not enough, they're too aggressive, they're lacking, and we start running into persistent problems. So with my chiropractic friends, like I mentioned, we would be singing the song, "The foot bone's connected to the ankle bone." He'd say, "Hey, doc, forget that. It's the backbone's connected to the knee bone." So we would meet in the middle regarding the importance.
That was always the difficult, or that is, which part of the link is it driving from the hips down, or are we driving from the ankle up?
Well, the point is to pay attention to both. And, the point is again, is to pay big attention to history. Who's had problems in the past with, their feet and ankles. The most common thing we see in active people in the world of podiatry is called plantar fasciitis, the inflammation of the arch of the foot and its connection to the heel. And so many times, huge topic today, again, is, what's the best shoe for you? What is the best shoe? It's funny, a colleague of mine 25 years ago wrote a book, kind of a soft cover, and the title was something like that, Choosing the Best Shoe. And he had a picture on the front cover, and it was a collage of about 50 brands. And that was the point. Yes.
So, of course, a lot is a lot is performance driven, but a lot, of course, is fashion driven, and
that's true.
Paid promotion and stuff, and
I thought that was a good trend, because it's hard to beat a good sports shoe for your whole posture. It's got great arch support. It helps put your feet in the proper alignment. It's got shock absorption. So the fact that fashion would also pick up the fact that we would also could be dressed in a lot of ways and have some really cool sports shoes was a big step up.
Of course, there was always that question and I think that's where a little bit of the barefoot running nonsense came around. A lot of things was that, well, how come we've got all this great new technology in the shoes, but the incidence of injuries are going up?
Good question.
thought about?
No, it's a good question, and I wrote an article, and if people want to see my articles, they want to find out all about my radio show, they can go to sportsdoctorradio.com. If they go to radio shows, they can go back 10 years and see what they might want to listen to or what topic might interest them. But in that particular area, many times when you're talking about some of these tendencies, I wrote about barefoot running, and in general, with again going back to my friend Bob Guida, he would have all his athletes doing some training barefoot on the beach,
Yes.
barefoot like on a golf course, and that was always a good part of strengthening parts of the feet. Unless it was problematic, and then we would back off that. The idea, though, of not having the protection of shoes, even including surfaces, you're stepping on glass or rocks or whatever. So I would tell, in general, runners this: if you don't have any history of problems, you've been running 5 years or longer, and you don't have a history of knee problems, foot problems, whatever, you want to go lighter and lighter to see how you adjust. You
Mhm.
want to even play around with, if you're on the beach or you're running on a golf course, hey, you want to, I wouldn't be a distance runner and be a barefoot runner. It's idiocy. We've seen much more problems in that regard. But the question is still out there, is less better in the world of running shoes in weight, in bulk?
Mhm.
And as a rule, it's hard to beat the good name brand running shoe we're all familiar with, whether it's Nike, whether it's Reebok. I'm a big New Balance fan, Adidas. There's a lot of good brands. But here's an amazing stat, Joe, which is almost half of us, and even including recreational sports, are not fit properly. Think about that.
Mhm.
It's like amazing when you think about it. So we tell whether it's you or the serious athlete or the parents, get properly fit. Very often the width is off,
Mhm.
and we start running into concerns. Or as we get a little bit older, not to be facetious, we start saying, "Hey, man, I was always size 9.5, and now I'm 10.5, and I'm not willing to admit it, wondering why my toes bother me." So fitting is something you got to pay attention to, because a lot of people are not fit properly, and that it's a problem causer.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, they always stick to the same size. It baffles people when you ask them for a shoe measure in a shoe shop. So
Yes, and
they
we start,
want to find it.
yeah. And for as another generality with the importance of shoes, I don't care what the sport is, if you've got a brand and style that's worked for you, stick with it.
Yeah,
We don't have to be jumping around, because again, today there's tremendous name brand. It started with Air Jordans, where we would have everybody wanted this particular brand or this particular shoe. We would run into concerns even on a team, where the team wanted to be all in the same shoe, and there might be three athletes on that team that's not the best shoe for them. I don't tell anybody, but in the world of tennis, years ago, the great tennis who was number one in the world, Andrea Jaeger, a few others, we were seeing the John McEnroes and the Tracy Austins, and I won't name who it was, that we actually changed the insignia on the shoe. So we weren't stuck with the same shoe that was causing problems, because
yeah,
that's who their sponsor was.
yeah.
So you want to pay attention to those factors.
Yeah, that's been across with previous interviews with your namesake, Bob Kidd in Australia, when they were working, were doing research on marathon shoes in Scotland. Again, the shoe brand was trying to push their agenda with them, and I've heard previous stories of colleagues being let go from the sports medicine team because they've highlighted that the shoes aren't helping the players, so they've got rid of the sports medicine team rather than get rid of the sponsor.
Well, when you're paying right, when you're paying players millions and millions of dollars, I remember when we first saw McEnroe, he was one of the first guys he was endorsing, was wearing Nike, their cross trainer, into their tennis type shoe. And the idea again was, he had to be comfortable. You had to be comfortable in that particular shoe. And to this day, the only sport that pays attention to motion control, hyperpronation, shock absorption is running shoe industry.
Mhm.
You can't buy a soccer shoe or a tennis shoe or a baseball shoe that's got that criteria. I find that amazing, but it's true.
Mhm. Yeah. And of course, you were quite involved with. We were going to talk a good bit this evening about pediatric sort of foot and ankle leg problems. So, I mean, kids'
Yeah.
shoes are obviously pretty essential and pretty important. Especially,
Here, let me see if I can show it to you here. Yeah, again, here it is.
so bring it up to
Hashtag, hashtag Hey Sports Parents.
yes.
My co-author is a Hall of Fame volleyball player, prolific author, radio host, Hall of Fame volleyball player,
Mhm.
Sharky Zartman. She's coached, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids. So again, youth sports today, Joel, is a $20 billion a year business. And again, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, there is a tremendous challenge physically and mentally.
Mhm.
Today, the nightmare in youth gymnastics has continued to explode around us, whether it's the doctor, whether it's the coach, all of these factors. And when I have seen serious youngsters, especially in the world of figure skating and tennis, again, the more talented that boy girl, the more the pressure is on. Hey, listen, doc, my daughter needs 2 Advil twice a day. Her knees are killing her playing volleyball every day. Or, don't you understand, doc? The tryouts. I
Mhm.
mean, the championship is next week.
Can't you just give her a shot?
Well, sometimes if it's under supervision and
Yeah.
it's good sports medicine, all these things are in the toolbox. But when we come to the reality, Little League Baseball 25 years ago woke up and realized that 40% of the players didn't want to come back and play. And the reason they didn't want to come back and play is it was the pressure, the
Yeah.
wind, the screaming parents, all of this stuff. Today, I feature on my show great organizations like the National Alliance of Youth Sports,
Mhm.
like in your country, McClellan's working with parents in sports, a great organization called iSport 360, which is an app for parents and coaches to communicate. So there is great stuff. And there's a lot of good news, for instance, in adolescence and youth sports. But you got to understand when you're watching television and the national champion in girls figure skating is 14 years old, she started when she was 5 or 6.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's not for everybody,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of great excitement in it, but it's big business.
Huge business. But of course,
Yeah,
I think as you said, there is the well. Of course, we don't know now. There is a bit more of a push to be, uh, not just to be one sport specific. Certainly, at such
agreed.
a situation.
Very important. You mentioned that even when we were chatting before the show. You know that 80% of the World Cup women's soccer team,
Mhm.
80% of these gals played other sports.
Okay.
And they're big advocates. Absolutely. Your son or daughter, you should try your best for them to grow up, experiment, and continue to play whatever they want to play. Once they're 13, 14, 15,
Mhm.
and their body's rapid growth many times is not that dramatic, specialization sometimes is not a bad thing. But the reality in the prodigy sports is, again, I see 10-year-old, 9-year-old figure skaters. They're skating 6 days a week. This is what they want to do. So, what do we do about that? Well, what we do is we put them together with good sports therapists and physical therapists to do, again, hey, Bob Guide, I'm giving you a commercial here, to do what he would say strengthen the opposites,
Yes.
strengthen the breaks. If this kid is playing basketball year round, you got to strengthen his ability to come down from all that jumping,
Mhm.
or your ability. He's throwing 10 months a year. One of my famous guests last couple of months, Dr. Chris Ahmad, is the team doctor of the New York Yankees for the past 5 or 6 years. He writes extensively, even about Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
Reality today is 25% of Tommy John surgery is done on teenagers.
Mhm.
It's nuts. So the realization that this kind of physical overuse in so many of the different sports, the scheduling is a real challenge. And this is why we tell parents all the time, number one, don't be a critic, try your best. And number two, be a good listener and talk to your son or daughter about their communications with their coach and whether they're hurting.
Because you're really with your Hey Sports parents. I mean, you're educating the parents really.
Yes. Here's another shot. This is very current. This is MVP sports parent.
Okay.
Going back to sports with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is the issue that the article on the Prodigy Sports was included. This rush to get back to school sports. Um, the it's amazing the mental stress that's been on all these boys and girls. You don't know if you're going to play. Your season's been canceled. So, what's been very apparent when I talk to all these parents and coaches and therapists, they say one of the biggest problems is mental health
Yeah.
and trying to deal with this chaos that's been part of everybody's life, and it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Everybody I talk to, Justin, no matter who they are, no matter what their background is in the world of fitness or sports or whatever, they've got their stories on what it's been like, the challenge of this whole COVID.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, we're
it's
starting
big,
to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but I
a
know
lot of
my
light,
a
a
lot
lot of
of
light.
light. Okay, well, because my sons are starting to get back. When the rugby season was cancelled, that's a winter thing here. The Irish Gaelic football season will sort of start off again sort of March time, so they're preparing
All of your sons.
preparing for that. They so it has been quite a
How old are your boys?
18 last week and
Oh, wow. Happy birthday.
11.
Yeah,
And
rugby is one of those superstar sports. Amazingly, all these years without equipment,
mm,
it takes a tremendous athlete. And tell your boys, the sports doctor said, do two things. One, work those feet and ankles with the rubber bands, and work balance. Work balance for core strengthening.
yeah.
How long have they played rugby? How young were they when they
Oh,
started?
again, started off sort of 5, 6 years of age.
Right,
So
there you are.
yeah.
Hey, there.
But
I'll send you a copy. I'm going to send you an autographed copy.
but like with all the kids, and I'm sure like they have been lucky enough to be able to try a little bit of everything from ice skating to tennis to sailing. I like a bit of sailing, and it's stuck with some of them. Horse riding. I've got a daughter who's obsessed with horses and events and stuff, and so they've been able to try and
I'm going to tell
certainly.
you two sports you just mentioned. I'm going to tell you quickie, funny stories on both sports: horseback riding, and sailing. As a podiatrist with orthotics, which is most of what I do is orthotics, whether it's for grandma's shoes or for your son or daughter's soccer spikes or rugby spikes or whatever, or figure skates, we would be talking about what was my chain of thought? I almost lost it for the second with you.
You're going to say when the kids have multi sports, you're going to tell me an anecdote about sailing and horse riding.
Yes, see, am I glad you're sharp? And someone said to me, "What are you talking about?" I had these three young girl figure skaters. They were all equestrians. They were all very serious equestrians, jumping and riding horses. And people would say, what do you got orthotics in their shoes? They're on a horse. And we would talk about their alignment and their position regarding on horses. The other instance is this young competitive sailor um, uh, uh, in these international sports.
Yeah.
And in the comparison of athletes, this gal was as fit and more of an athlete than almost any other sport with the training she did to deal with a sailboat and a racing boat. So I had to throw those in because sometimes people don't realize what a serious sport sometimes,
Yeah,
what the heck does podiatry have to do with that?
and across all levels. But a lot of the well, you're quite very familiar having worked with that with Olympic ice skaters from a very young age, uh, and orthotics in ice skating boots. Yeah, I've put orthotics in hockey boots before. We had to blow the boot though. We had to expand the hard shell of the boot. I had quite a prominent navicular. They're pretty neat to get anything inside them, aren't they? And I thought,
Yeah. Are you a podiatrist?
yeah, yeah,
I'm kidding you. The world of I would tell you again, I've never had a skater or a coach, and I've put the Blackhawks, I put a lot of them in orthotics over the years. One of the best ways to prevent injury and very excitedly enhance edging,
yeah.
propulsive, is a proper orthotics and skates. When the orthotic, and you want me to get a couple of samples to show you?
Okay.
Okay, you got 2 seconds?
Yeah, if you have
Hold
them,
on.
because
I know. Talk to your audience.
well, no, I mean, did
I
you?
know.
I mean, I'm a little bit like canting for fitment of feet on pedals and clipped in on bikes. Uh, did you ever change the position of the blade rather than change the or put an orthotic in?
Good question. Good question. Here is an example of the
Very,
type of orthotic I've been putting in skates
very
for
good.
40 years.
Yeah,
This is made from a cast impression from an ideal alignment to that complicated foot ankle.
yeah.
These streamlined, unbreakable plastics will fit right on top of whatever the insole is that came with the hockey skate. For years, I never covered them.
Yeah.
And when I have a 4 foot challenge of any type, I might cover this orthotic full shoe. But so many of the kids would grow up and they would take the orthotics out of their hockey skates and put them in their gym shoes and back into their figure skates and back into the. And we found that this was Evan Lysacek. This is what he's in. Grew up in. This is what he won the Olympics in. So, and I got a great article with great pictures on my website, sportsdoctorradio.com. If someone goes to newspaper articles and they go to Podiatry Management Magazine, they will read from 2010 an article I wrote about his whole world and growing up with orthotics and the world of skating. So, yes, if done properly, and it's a big if, orthotics are magic in skates. Um, and half the time I've used orthotics and skates, Joel, are knee trouble. How do you like that?
Yeah.
Half the time that I've been seen to talk orthotics and skating, especially in figure skating and girls, 50% of the girls I see them because their knees hurt.
Yeah.
And they have pronated feet and they've got extra torque down to the foot. And what's been your orthotic experience in the world of sports? Are your kids in them?
On and off, I think.
Okay.
Uh,
I'd say to them, do you want to be a step quicker or don't you?
mhm.
Now, if they said to me, I don't like them, that's a different story. Then we've got to make number one with any orthotic, especially if I got someone doing quad jumps, with orthotics in their skates, they better be comfortable, right? Or if the guy's on the rugby field and he says, the doc here made the orthotics for me. I don't find them comfortable. They don't fit in the shoe, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is a very important follow-up. If I'm putting orthotics in your shoes, I'm going to make sure you're comfortable and that we get feedback because on occasion something's got to be adjusted, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was always the thing. Comfort. I mean, with colleagues who would never didn't have to do adjustments is always it took me to entertain me a little bit. Everybody
Yeah, I
needed.
understand. How do you cast? Do you
Oh,
use plaster cast?
old school plaster Paris
Me
cast.
too. I believe it's by far the most precise, and I've never been happy with any of the other ways. And that's why, again, it's such a big deal when you talk about proper orthotics. And it has to be, I have found, again, polypropylene plastic, whether I'm putting it in an 85-year-old grandma's walking shoes with a full shoe, soft, let's say Spenco cover, or I'm putting it in a triple jump figure skaters. These kinds of polypropylenes, I've never seen them break.
Yeah.
And we've been able to it's the reason I haven't made any money. It's because the material never wears out.
Well, yeah, we're all quite lucky. We're with one lab here in Ireland. Well, it's based in the UK, and they had a lifetime guarantee on their materials.
Do
Brilliant.
you work with Justin Tisdale at all?
I've heard
The Australian podiatrist?
we're due to speak with Jackson in the next week or so.
Oh,
Yeah,
he's excellent. This kid is really, he's been so impressive. I had him on even before he was famous, when he was fresh out. He's a young kid, and I had him on a couple of times, and I've had some of his colleagues on
yeah,
from Australia. Shane, the acupuncturist podiatrist.
Tui.
Yes,
Yes,
he was
him.
on a couple of months ago.
Yeah,
So I've been very excited to consult with, talk to, hear from
yeah.
many of your colleagues.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. Jackson is one of the big popular fields of everything physio.
Yes.
You know,
Well, that's it.
um,
With your work with Ball back in the early 70s, again, when you discovered that the foot was connected to the rest of the body, then you actually discovered that these guys weren't just fixing athletes and kids with orthotics. They were actually fixing them with rehab therapy. So strength
big
and
time.
conditioning.
Yes, I found that both our profession, the heavily, let's say, surgical podiatry profession has for years neglected the real importance of biomechanics and how just a couple of weeks ago I had on the inventor, the podorthist, Matt Oglio, who created that Victory carbon insole
Mhm.
that a lot of people are very, very excited about. The whole world of rebound
Yes.
effect, that's been new now, even in the running shoes, that we've seen. But the concept of putting your feet and ankles in their best functioning alignment is why I would tell parents or coaches, don't ask me if your son or daughter or if their player needs orthotics. Ask me if they'd benefit.
Mhm.
I think it's a key point, and I find that you guys have been very, very ahead of a lot of people here in the world of adding exercise and functional therapy. Um, but I just don't find that the orthotics or a crutch something that a person needs. I think orthotics are positioners
Yes.
so that our foot becomes a supinated lever to
Mhm.
push us off on time.
That's pronated. Yeah,
Yes,
it's difficult. I mean, the kinesiological aspects. I mean, one of the recent guys who owns one of the labs here said they're a load modifier.
good point. Yeah,
So,
that's the idea of this carbon. Also, one of the things they're talking now, the podorthist, of course, is combining that technology with proper positioning, orthotic alignment, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea of coming down softer, the idea of having better function. I've always found the athlete who had orthotics definitely came down softer. They had better alignment. They weren't bashing the rest of their body. So that term you just used, what was it? The
which
term you just used in is as far as the slowing down effect or the
will decelerate, but
exactly.
yeah, the and so, but a lot of the rehab, of course, would have been developed out of the sort of sports medicine around the Olympic athletes, around the football players and tennis players.
Absolutely. It's funny, like the strength and conditioning world came from the weightlifters.
Okay.
So the athletes in all sports caught on really, really big. Runners were a tough sell. When we would talk to runners about you have to strengthen your body, and they would say, get lost. It'll make me tight. It'll bulk me up. Or the tennis player would say, I don't want, McEnroe never worked out. He never did an exercise. It was Guida who really helped teach him. You got to be stronger, man. You'll never hold up. Now, the physical side that you're talking about, the prehab, the
Yeah.
rehab. Um, but yes, you're right. In the 1970s, it was a tough sell.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the size and the distance of the golf, or the size of the golfers and things now, the way that I mean, those guys have they have the technique, but of course they need the strength and conditioning to be able to compete.
Yes, but this is one of the things we're seeing, in all sports, women's sports especially, where there's been an explosion of athleticism. In the world of figure skating, when we think back of Olympic champions like Michelle Kwan and Dorothy Hamill and Peggy Fleming, none of them did triple jumps. Today, I'll show you 5 of them at every local rink. So you've got players in all sports. Take a look at some of these baseball players, these shortstops. The guy's 6'3", 220 now.
It's at a completely different level.
Yes. So, as a podiatrist, as a sports medicine team member, the idea of year-round training, it's not that long ago, you didn't have consulting nutritionists, you didn't have consulting mental trainers,
Mhm.
or consulting, again, the strength and conditioning coaches didn't exist. The power lifters and the weightlifters started telling the football coaches and the football players, hey, weight training will really, really make a tremendous difference. And those were initially, now it's a specialty on its own. And if anything, it's caused some trouble also with the year-round training and pushing these athletes just beyond limits in a lot of ways, especially if your son or daughter is trying for a scholarship, or maybe you're going to be a pro, or maybe you are an Olympic level. What kind of pressure is you and your family under to stay in the game?
Yes, yeah, huge amount. I mean, kids that I've seen play at sort of up to national, international level. I mean, it's of course it's all consuming. It's hugely consuming. The time and the
Well, that's why I spend so much time on the sports doctor. And as a matter of fact, the sports doctor airs, and I know by heart already, because when I have guests like you on, that you're 6 hours ahead on
yeah,
Wednesdays. But you want to laugh? My Australian guests are the next morning. They're
mhm,
on at 6 in the morning when we go on live. So in the United States, an hour a week. But again, for decades, I call it the mental game, and we've talked about the tremendous importance of the whole side of it, whether it's in competing, or whether it's in dealing with your teammates, or whether it's in dealing with an injury,
yes.
and
So there
so
is a lot.
having those team members, and podiatry is a big important member of the team. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, even more. I mean, certainly it should be podiatrists and physical therapists wheelhouse now with everybody. Again, the interest in keeping fitter, healthier, higher, faster, stronger, to keep us all free from COVID. I mean, it was a great opportunity over the last year. So everybody was exercising more, getting fitter and healthier.
Yes, and one of the big challenges again is with the explosion of coming back into the sport, and we all saw the amazing watching our professional leagues in the United States deal with. I mean, the National Football League played the whole season. They played the Super Bowl. The NBA did it. Baseball, they were canceling every other, the college basketball, the whole thing's been crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
they've
and
had,
again, the mental pressures,
they had a
very,
ski.
very difficult.
They've just had the world champion skiing in Italy. I mean, they're through the middle of the rugby Six Nations here. The football, the soccer still going strong. Cricket. I mean, they're trying to keep it as normal as possible, as you can. And yeah, well, I'm a Bears fan for my sins, so they showed it on TV here.
Oh,
So
you are a Chicago Bears football fan?
yes, with the with Walter Payton, and
Hey, Jim McMahon wore my orthotics.
it
Yes,
is.
Jim McMahon, one of the great characters. in sports medicine, a guy who was a terrific guy. I recycle his picture every once in a while from the '80s when I'm giving him one of his shoes, and he's making fun of me because the picture on the wall was of me with Tracy Austin, the great tennis player. I had come in on a special occasion in shorts and a shirt to see Jim to give him the orthotics, and he's looking at me and he's looking at the picture on the wall, and we have the same shirt on that I was wearing like the previous summer. So 6 months later, when he sent me an autographed picture, he said, "Doc, I love the orthotics. P.S. Get a new shirt." Uh, but they all came to GIDA for prehab, but then mostly rehab.
Yeah.
McMahon had major shoulder surgery. He did all of his rehabilitation with this Bob GIDA in order to be able to throw that, heavy football. And, I'm sure in your country and in the sport of rugby, because we talk about it a lot, the challenge of concussions and the tremendous challenge of that whole awareness. How are you guys doing in the world of rugby?
Well, there's a lot more awareness now, especially at all levels. And I mean, I think they're even talking about banning kids of a certain age from heading a ball in sort of soccer. I mean,
I got news for you. That's just smart sports medicine. Every expert I've had on from around the world has said the same thing. Every concussion is a brain injury.
yeah,
The big problem is repetitive head stress, running into trouble in all sorts of ways, whether it's young guys' cognitive skills or their memory or the difficult. So, as hard as it is with sports like rugby and football and the tremendous traditions, hockey, the tremendous condition or traditions, I mean, we're all facing the reality and with the head trauma.
yeah. And
So,
of course, parents won't be very keen for their kids to participate
no,
in
yeah,
rugby.
that's right. Football's dropped off a roof here
Yeah,
in the United States.
but rugby is
And
yeah.
here's something that I write about constantly. It's one sentence long. Are you ready?
Mhm.
There is no safe tackle football,
Yeah,
period.
yeah.
And there ain't no
There's
safe
no safe tackle. One of my
uh,
who's
rugby.
coaches right up through from five up to again
So we're
senior.
all learning.
So I'll tell you, there is no such thing. You cannot make it. You cannot make it. I
True.
mean,
I mean, you could slide into second base and break an ankle. You could, get injured coming down for a rebound. You could do anything. When we start getting into the world of overuse and we start getting into the world of just having persistent trouble, many times because of demand or schedules, this is when we start becoming very, very concerned and trying to learn from science absolutely as we go along. And if it means, getting rid of full contact collisions in hockey, you got to understand these kids are twice as strong, they're twice as big. We're going to have nothing but trouble. And, tackle football, a tough decision for a parent, as
yeah,
I'm sure, rugby is.
yeah,
But the reality of trying to make it as safe as possible for growing kids
yeah,
when it comes to head collisions and understanding, it's always been an argument in the United States or a discussion. Well, you got helmets in football. Are helmets a weapon? Are helmets protecting you? See, because helmets protect against a fracture, they don't protect against side to side collision trouble, which is what concussions are. And this is where rugby would say, hey, we have maybe less concussions than you, and we don't have helmets.
yeah. Well, the way your guys throw themselves around, it's it's
Well, you
really
got to be, are you willing to change the rules? And the answer is good luck to us. When it comes to these kinds of challenges, again, with the idea of drugs that we talked before, when I threw out to you the renaming of performance enhancing drugs, performance surviving, think about it. You're a professional athlete, your
let's
career's on the line.
let's expand on that again. Just run that past people again, Dr. Bob.
Yes. The idea.
Yeah.
Performance enhancing drugs, we've all thought of cheaters. We've all very know the famous names involved. And yes, there always has been, there always will be cheating. But I'm here to tell you that the vast, vast majority of the pain killing epidemic and all that with the opioids and all of these things regarding these medicines were for surviving.
Mhm.
Doctor, I think he's got a game next week. He's got a big contract. He's got to play. Jim McMahon would say he never played a game. He didn't have some sort of painkillers. Routine. When you think about it, it's absurd. It's nuts.
Yeah.
So the fact is, yes, there are cheaters, but even at the highest of level, most of these, there's so much talking about the ACL knee injuries and, trying to come back faster and faster and faster. And why? Because of these tremendous pressures. So if we see that you start taking painkillers and you need some of them in order to get back on the field, what would you do if your contract is at stake or your this has been one of the challenges. I'm a very big CBD fan. I'm a
Mhm.
very big medical marijuana fan. I've
Yeah.
watched for decades as athletes would tell me it helped, but they couldn't do it because it was illegal. They'd rather get a prescription for an opioid. Think about it.
Yeah. So Jim McMahon's quite a pro, not pro-choice, but pro marijuana, pro
Oh yeah,
medical.
so there's so many of
Everyone
the idea CBD though is the other advantage is all the advantages of marijuana's effect on stress, on maybe having the athlete sleep better, maybe reducing pain, maybe reducing anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. All great things. But the getting high side was a hassle. It was illegal. It's all these other things. CBD is the advantage of all of the medicinal effects without the getting high or side effects.
Mhm.
So many times we say it's safe. Someone wants to try CBD because they got knee arthritis or because their back hurts or because et cetera, et cetera, or your son or daughter we're looking at. Absolutely. The problem is that CBD is the Wild West. There's a million companies. There's a lot of who could I trust and whatever. We get questions about that all the time. But it's back to the main premise that you were talking about. Think about it. Where sports have gotten so out of hand in many instances that you can't give, Lance Armstrong was fighting cancer. He came back from his deathbed. You're going to get mad at him for taking drugs to be able to come back and win the Tour de France? I'd say get lost.
Mhm.
I understand that. It's not that I condone it, but
Yes.
when we start seeing it in kids where they need over-the-counter medicine to show up for practice or because they're hurting, then we start seeing trouble because a minor problem that's left alone can become a much more serious sports problem. And so we want to pay attention early. If
That
your
was
son or
always
daughter
the way. I
and
mean,
don't be afraid,
that
right?
was always the way. I would get a kid with a heel pain or an ankle problem, and the kid would be, the mum would prompt him, tell him all about it, and you'd start asking some questions, and the kid would say, "Oh, I've had this for a year," and the mum would look at him going, "No, you only told me 6 weeks ago," and the kid's looking at the mum going, "What do you mean? I've been talking to you for."
Absolutely. Absolutely. The old story on whose goal is it? I'll tell you a funny, quickie story. When Evan Lysacek again won the Olympic gold medal, and I knew him for all those years, and I had his mom on. It's on my website, I think. If I after the Olympics, I had her on the radio. His mom, Tanya, and I said, Tanya, how did you know it was his goal and it necessarily wasn't yours? Pushing him, and all of these things we hear. She said, Dr. Bob, we had ice time at 6:30 in the morning. I never had to wake the kid up. There he was in the car with his gloves and his hat on. I said, I can't imagine a better answer than that. But again, parents, once the sport starts getting serious, expensive, time consuming, then I think parents need to be good listeners and they have to be in tune. How are you doing with your coach? Asking your son or daughter, are you getting along with your coach or is there a problem? Do you feel you're under pressure? Are you sneaking medicine in order to be able to? A lot of parents, if I ask parents, raise your hand if you think Advil's medicine, half of them don't raise their hand. In the United States, we are this is a pet peeve on my radio show, big time. United States is only one or two countries in the world that allows advertising on television of drugs. You got it in your country. We are brain dead with the idea that there's a pill or there's a drug for everything, and
I
it's
don't
a
know.
big deal.
Have you seen that cartoon recently where there's two patches. One's for lifestyle change and one's for
Right.
lifestyle change stuff. The next one's for a
Hey,
quick fix, and there's a queue
yes.
for the quick
Hey, quick fix has its place. Medicine is tremendously effective and helpful. I a lot of times will have a youngster or teenager taking two Advil a couple times a day for 10 days, for 12 days, for 5 days, but not to stay on the field in almost every instance. It's to get better. Again, I'm going to tell you the famous two words, intelligent rest, and what that means with any of these overuse problems that we start. My son or daughter's shins hurting all the time, and every time we try to get back to the sport and all of these other kinds of things. But I think, podiatry is a big part of those kinds of things. What are some of the different teams or clubs that you've worked with in your career?
and I've been lucky enough to work with, up to Olympic level as well. Rugby guys, dancers, and international runners, dancers.
Do you make it a point of pushing their foot and ankle strengthening?
Yes, no, we're very much on, especially in the last number of years when we focus more on manual therapy for treatments.
Guida, we used to have to find tire companies in the late 70s to make rubber bands
Yes,
into elastic bands that Gaida loved so much for strengthening and training. And I don't care if you're a grandmother or an 8-year-old or a superstar, rubber bands can be of tremendous value in strengthening. And the foot and ankle was always a great place to start. But, athletes were very concerned with how much they could bench press and how big their biceps are, right? So sometimes talking about feet and ankles.
it started when I started working probably the mid 90s with rehab therapists. It was also the core and transab, recruiting transab, and a lot of core function and stuff. And as you say, a lot of sort of being able to decelerate and
Yes. Every time you step on an unstable surface, I call it instability training. Imagine yourself standing on a mini trampoline or on a tilt board or on a Bosu or this great piece of equipment. Look it up, the sand dune stepper, which simulates sand resistance. We've done radio shows for a long time. Every time you create imbalance, you are strengthening every fiber in your body. When we used to hook people up to sensors from the top of their head to their toes that would go off when the different stabilizers, Guida loved this. Every time he would stand on a different surface, it would show that athlete, wow, everything is on. So include balance work in your training with unstable surfaces.
because how much, yeah, I mean, there's so much neural components to everything.
Yes, I agree with you 1,000,000%. And when people talk about muscle memory, and again they talk about one of my great figure skating coach colleagues. She's got the vestibular training system, which is the harness and the spinning,
Yes,
in order for these athletes to know where they are in space, and it's as effective for a child with autism as it is for a Parkinson's senior citizen, as it is for a triple jumper, working those inner ear neurological vestibular systems. I think we're learning a lot about including that. People would say, what else do you want to include? you know,
where do you start? And but so
hey, you said it. You start on your feet. Start on the ground, right? Right, Doc?
start. And and kids, of course, common things are common, but of course, there's a lot of those growing. That's the age of the skeletal development. They're at 14, 16.
Yes.
Heavy load over the summer,
Yes.
perhaps.
I think something very important, I would say to every parent. Um, as I've watched children grow up in orthotics over decades, who might have gone into them again as 10-year-olds and are 45 years old, they're still wearing them. Why are you still wearing them? My whole body feels better. And the idea that as the body is growing and we have different motions and analysis, again, we start to see, a young growing body is not a small adult. It's a different entity. So we've got to be careful with growth centers that are very, very involved. And until a girl might be 13 to 14 years old, a boy might be 15 to 16. And again, working these balance systems and strengthening, I call them the links, feet, ankles, knees, hips. And, Gaida, when Bob Gaida, he talked about the core, no one knew how to spell it. You didn't know what the heck he was talking about. And he was talking about whether you were throwing a ball, whether you were coming down for a rebound, whether you were rounding second base, the core was involved in everything. And it was just, a very, very new concept. And that's when he would say, he'd have these athletes walking on these oscillating balance beams to constantly challenge their balance techniques. Again, if you're standing on a mini tram, if you look at it as a clock, if you're standing with your right foot at 9 o'clock, the tram is pronating you, pushing you in. You're working all those opposites. If I move you to the other side of the tram, you're doing exactly the opposite. If I'm throwing a ball to you while you're doing that, kids love it. And again, it's very, very good. What you said, these neuromuscular mind awareness that have so much to do, with balance. And when we're trying to do the two things everybody cares about in sports medicine, right? Number one, can we prevent trouble? Right? And number two, for those who are indicated, can we enhance performance? You said it, step or two quicker, more explosive, you know?
That's good. And so with kids, a lot of what would have been the common problems. Yeah, heel pain, Osgood slatters.
There's a giant growth center in the heel, right? And that growth center is commonly irritated. It's one of the reasons I tell young rugby parents or young soccer parents, don't put your kids in cleats with these clumps of cleats right underneath the heel growth center very, very early, especially if they're having problems. So 90% of the heel trouble we see, it's the most common problem we see in young boys and girls who are running and jumping. They aggravate the heel growth center. And sometimes we need to pay attention to intelligent rest. What's the best shoe? We've had great success with orthotics when the problem is persistent.
Yeah.
Your son and daughters are so growth centers, the Osgood Schlatter, the growth irritation of the shin connection with the kneecap tendon attaches. This boy has grown 5 inches in the past year. Now his pronated feet are an aggravator. So again, I go back to, if your son or daughter, whatever their sport is dealing with problems in the joints, their knees, their back, their hips, their ankles, pay attention to consulting with Dr. Justin over here. Pay attention to including looking at biomechanics. It could
Yeah.
be magic and helpful.
Yeah, no, that's where, I mean, I think a lot more. Well, there's so much more advice out there. There's so much more training, and especially now when kids do move up into a slightly higher level, if they're onto a.
That's why I had last week, Kate Namatahali is the director of education for the National Alliance of Youth Sports.
Yeah.
They've trained for over 4 million coaches in the world of the Park District, et cetera. The idea of they have tremendous seminars. They're a great example of groups that are doing what you're saying, are educating parents and coaches to be more aware of all of these important factors. What about nutrition? What about hydration? What about, the one of my most famous radio guests, Gary Reinl, wrote the very big bestseller, Iced, the illusionary treatment option. Ice helps nothing
Mhm.
except numb an area. It
Yeah,
retards healing. It's a whole other show we'll do.
yeah. Yeah, I remember. Well, it's what was that? Sorry, what was that guy's name?
Gary Reinl is a trainer of champions, Reinl.
Did he do a couple of interviews with that guy? Who's that guy who does the mobility ward? Guy Sturrett, is it? Or oh, I can't remember. But I remember. Yeah, I think both.
You got me. But like Bob Guida, who became famous for talking against stretching for everything, and they came after him with a vengeance, the world of physical therapy. Gary Reinl, perish the thought, after 10 years of research, came out saying ice is a misnomer. Besides numbing an area, it retards the interaction of fluids for healing. It shocked the world. And we have a lot of cutting edge people like that on the sports doctor, and I'm going to add you to the list when I get you on.
But do you think that things have come around? I mean, you've been doing it long enough now that things come in and out of vogue.
But solid principles, though.
Okay, yeah.
True, solid principles, no matter how long it's been a habit. you
Mm.
know, that stretching prevents injuries and static stretching and bouncing stretching and this stretching and that stretching. And then the realization, gee, you're better off warming up, just jumping and skipping and running backwards like you did as a kid, in many instances. Yes, trends come and go like running shoe styles and brands. And even diet trends, if there's commercials more often than drugs, it's diets. You know how long I've talked about on my show childhood obesity? 20 years.
Yeah.
And we're still treading water with that challenge, with all the awareness of obesity and childhood obesity. It's a nightmare still
Yeah.
today.
The statistics for the
So,
diabetes and
yes, I think we're always on our toes. We're always on our toes. This is why I've had over 1,000 guests in my world of my encyclopedia of guests, because there's so many important things that we need to be paying attention to, let alone in our world of fake news, let alone in this new phenomenon that we're all up to our ears in, misinformation. It really is a challenge, big
mhm.
time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
throw sports medicine in the mix, man.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's been able to cherry pick
It's a point. Yes.
uh-huh. And they would you have set protocols for kid with Osgood's or a sort of Sever's disease heel pain, or is it all specific to what they're presenting with, or do
I
you have?
think a lot of protocol is what we're stressing. If the problem's persistent, pay attention to the role of podiatry and orthotics. If that heel growth center, which has been again, we have to back that kid off for a few weeks.
Yeah,
They might have a terrific foot type, but they're running up and down stairs. They land on the growth center, it gets inflamed. We back off, do some rest, maybe put some pads in. They do fine.
yeah,
But if this kid is back for the third year, of every time they get back into soccer, their heels hurt, you got to start paying attention to do you have a high arch foot where we're putting pressure on that heel? I'll tell you what's very common, the pronated foot and the shearing force underneath that heel, which
yeah.
now is aggravating the growth center. And a lot of times orthotics are very, very, very helpful.
Plus
Um,
the tightness of the growth and things, and then so pediatric foot surgery. Obviously, you're more a biomechanics orthotics specialist.
Forget pediatric foot surgery unless you've got, unless you have, as a general rule, unless you have exhausted all
Yeah,
conservative measures regarding controlling the forces that are causing the problems, whether it's a shoe change, whether it's including orthotics, whether it's a lot of physical therapy. But foot surgery and podiatric surgery has come a very, very long way, baby. And sometimes we see that there are concerns. But if the opinion you're getting, the first opinion is foot surgery, for your son or daughter, get a second opinion,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, definitely.
Bunions. again, like we're talking about bunions. My grandma had bunions. My mother has bunions. My 14-year-old daughter has bunions. Is that dislocation and bump of the big toe inherited? The foot type that develops it is inherited.
Yeah.
So I've had great success with putting orthotics in that 13-year-old tennis player or soccer player girl's shoes that might have been bothering her and trying to duck surgery later on. Of course, we can't say how much it helped because I don't have a time machine. In order to be able to see what would an X-ray have looked like, doctor, if she never wore orthotics 10 years later. Until you get a time machine, I can't do it. Right?
Yeah, and that's where it can be a little bit difficult with the research. And because we're only doing best, which is best practice at the time, obviously you're not setting out to cause issues, but it can have a knock-on effect. It's difficult to know where to start.
Okay, are we almost done?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
So everybody can find you, Dr. Bob.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. I'm excited. It was very disappointing to mess it up the last time with you. If people go to my website, sportsdoctorradio.com, they can go over to radio shows, they can go over newspaper articles and so much stuff we've been writing. I have over 30,000 followers on Twitter. I get a lot of guests from Twitter. We have over 10,000 on LinkedIn. I get a lot of guests from LinkedIn at sports doc. DOC Radio, hashtag at sports doc radio. They could find us on Twitter, but you can find out all the information on the website. And hey, thanks for having me, man. It's been great questions.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We'll talk to you again soon, and thank you very much, everybody. I'll just finish off.